Hi, I'm John Stevenson, and we're going to be looking at the Old Kingdom of Egypt in our continuing study of world civilizations. Egypt has been divided into 30 recognized dynasties, 30 different families that ruled Egypt over its history, beginning with the Archaic period, where you have the first two dynasties. Then you've got the Old Kingdom, that's dynasties 3 through 6. That's what we're going to be looking at in this session. That's going to be the Pyramid era, where most of the pyramids are built during this time. But then after that, we're going to see that Egypt falls apart in a intermediate period. There's going to be several of those, so we're going to call that the first intermediate period. And then it's going to come back together, and we'll see this in future lectures. There'll be the Middle Kingdom with dynasties 11 and 12. That'll be the time of the patriarchs. And then a second intermediate period followed by the New Kingdom, dynasties 18, 19, and 20. And that's going to be the time of Moses and the Exodus. And then there'll be a third intermediate period after that, and then the rest of Egyptian history. Burial practices during this time involved, first of all, the Egyptians didn't have any idea of cremation. They would have been horrified at the idea of burning a body or destroying the body. They wanted the body to be buried. Sometimes that would be in sand or maybe with something over it so that animals wouldn't dig it up. And for the rich people, they would be buried in a mastaba. Now, the term mastaba is actually Arabic. The term mastaba is Arabic, and it just means bench. And so I'm not sure what the Egyptians called it, but it was a structure where you'd have a pit dug in the middle, but then a structure built over it to commemorate and also to protect the body that was being buried. When we come to Pharaoh Dozier, he's going to build a mastaba, and then he's going to build a smaller mastaba on top of that, and then a smaller one on top of that, almost like a series of like layer cakes. And this is going to be the first pyramid, but it won't be a true pyramid. It will be the step pyramid of Dozier. As we look at this pyramid, notice it's still standing today. You can still go and see it today. It has an outer structure that was designed to celebrate the life and the death of the king. So it wasn't just the pyramid by itself, but there was also, I guess you could call it a mortuary temple. And if you look at the inside of this temple, here's one of the hallways with the columns that are built. The columns are structured to make it look that they are made of trees that are bound together, bamboo trees maybe, that are bound together to form pillars. Now, they're not bamboo. This is made of stone. This is the first large stone building ever made. But it tells you what it used to look like before they switched to stone. They would make these pillars of reeds, of logs that were set together one upon the other. When you look at the ceiling, you see the same thing. It looks like there are logs up there forming the ceiling. Those aren't logs. That's all wood. That's all stone that you're seeing. But it's carved to look like the logs because people were used to seeing the wood, and yet they were going to do something new. They were building this building out of stone. Next, we come to Pharaoh Sneferu. He's around 2600. He's going to be the founder of the 4th dynasty, and he's going to be the first true pyramid builder, but it's not going to start off quite so well as he begins building pyramids. His first pyramid is known as the Dune pyramid, and it started off a little bit like the mastaba approach, where there was a mastaba and one on top of that, and then he tried to have limestone rock that was built on top of that to form a true pyramid. It didn't work. It collapsed, and so what you see here are the ruins around that, and this pyramid. It started out being built, and it didn't work, and so it was left in that unfinished state. And Sneferu didn't give up. He next goes to build a second pyramid. Now remember, the pyramids are designed to replace the mastaba. They are they are going to be burial places. And this pyramid, they start to build it, and about halfway up, it starts to crumble as well. And so the builders change the angle of the pyramid, so it becomes the bent pyramid, and we're talking about the big one, not the little one to the side, where it starts off at one angle, and then about halfway up they change the angle so that it won't crumble. But still, it's not very safe. It's not very secure. And Sneferu goes on to build a third pyramid. You can still see on the left the bent pyramid, but his third pyramid, if you look at the pyramid, it's known as the red pyramid because it's got a little bit of a reddish cast to it. And this is the pyramid that's finally built for him. And so 3 pyramids, 3 strikes, but he hits the last one out of the ballpark, and this becomes a true pyramid. The first true pyramid to be built. Now, next we have the Great Pyramid of Khufu. The Greeks like to refer to him as Cheops, but we're going to go with the Egyptian name Khufu. This is the Great Pyramid. This is the biggest of all the pyramids. It's going to stand next to the pyramid of his son, which is just a bit smaller, but this is a true pyramid. It was the largest structure, the highest structure, man-made structure, to be built. I believe until the Eiffel Tower. That's a long, long time. It stands, and now it looks a little bit smaller in this picture because it's over to the left, but that's just because it's further away. But it stands up on an escarpment, a plateau, the Giza Plateau, overlooking the Nile Valley. And when you look at the pyramid, we're standing, my wife and I are standing close to it, you can't just your eye doesn't really take in just how big it is. The pictures really do not do it justice. The size of the blocks are absolutely incredible. To realize that each one of these had to be carved and cut and then moved into place. Now, there were some blocks that were moved, I understand, I've been told, from far away, but most of it was excavated fairly closely, and the excavation sites from which these were cut are fairly close. But still, it was a marvelous work that involved a lot of organization, not slave labor. This was free labor. Remember the Nile would flood every summer. And so the workers during the summer didn't have anything to do, and so they would be brought and they would work on the pyramid, and that was where the bulk of the work would take place. They couldn't farm, and so they could work on this pyramid. The interior of the pyramid, and remember, this is a burial, and there is initially a descending passage. But instead of placing the body of the king there, instead it takes a turn to go up into the interior of the pyramid, and there's a chamber referred to as the king's chamber, that's high up on the pyramid, and a sarcophagus placed inside of that, but the sarcophagus will not fit out the passageways, which means that the sarcophagus, when I say sarcophagus, that's the box, the stone box into which the body of the pharaoh would be laid. It had to be built into the pyramid itself, and the pyramid built around it. The entrance of the pyramid, you can see the entrance of the pyramid, although when it was completed, this was hidden. It was hidden flush into the pyramid. There were rocks over top of that. What you see here are the gabled rocks that are built so that there can be a space that won't collapse. Very sound feat of engineering, but the entrance was hidden, and then the entire pyramid covered with a sheath of white limestone, so that it looked like a giant diamond that had just fallen from the sky. Now, we don't normally enter the main entrance of the pyramid. It's sort of hard to get to. Instead, you see the people here, they're standing in line, and they're usually going to enter down below it. There's a second entrance. This is known as the robber's entrance, where the robbers' tunnel, where in 820 A.D., during the time of the Muslim occupation of Egypt. Egypt is still Muslim today, but at that time the Caliph Al-Ma'mun, he had some workers dig a tunnel trying to find the entrance to the pyramid, and they dug quite a ways in, and they were about to give up when one of the workers heard a stone fall inside, like a sound, and it wasn't anything they had dropped. And they thought, well, we must be nearby, and sure enough, they were. And they went in and they made contact with the hidden entrance, and thus found their way into the pyramid. Now, nearby is the pyramid of Khafre, and the pyramid of Khafre is not quite as tall. It's almost, but notice it still has some of that limestone sheathing at the top of the pyramid to give you an idea of what that looked like. Originally, both these pyramids were completely covered by that limestone sheath. Where did the limestone go? Well, if you want to see it today, you go into Cairo and you look at the Muslim mosques. They're made of white limestone, and that limestone was taken from these pyramids and then transported in town to build those mosques. We also see the Sphinx. That's a very popular site. Of course, the way the picture is taken here, it looks like the Sphinx is almost as large as the pyramid. It's certainly not. It's much smaller. The pyramid's quite a bit further away, and the Sphinx is much closer to our foreground, which makes the Sphinx appear bigger than it really is in comparison to the pyramid. If you see the people at the base of the pyramid in the distance, you can barely see them. They're so very small. That's quite a far distance away. Now, the Sphinx, some people have wondered, is it as old as the pyramids? Is it older? No, it's not older. Although the rock, you see, it was carved from a slab of rock. It wasn't built in the way the Sphinx was, where all these bricks were taken and set into place. Instead, it was carved from rock. And what happened is they were building the temple complex, because remember, a pyramid always has a temple complex associated with it. And they were building a causeway out to the temple complex, and there was this big slab of rock that was in their way. What are we going to do with it? And instead of trying to cut it out, they went around it, and then they carved the Sphinx from that slab. So we know when the Sphinx was formed. We know when it was carved. It was carved at the same time during the time of the Old Kingdom. Notice between the paws of the Sphinx. We're going to come back because at a much later date, there is a inscription going to be placed there, but we're going to see that inscription wasn't placed there until the New Kingdom, and that's going to be very significant to our story. So just note the pause. Oh, notice the nose of the Sphinx. There's an old legend that says the French, when they first came to Egypt, that they shot off the nose of the Sphinx using the face for target practice for their artillery. That's not true. When you look at a lot of statues, one of the first things to break off is the nose, because it's sort of sticking out there, and it's weathered and it erodes, and so no truth to the idea that the French would shoot the nose off the Sphinx. They wouldn't do that sort of thing. We have a number of other pyramids. Now, some of the pyramids have just collapsed into rubble. Here's one. I don't even know the name of it. Just happened to see it and snap a picture. But the pyramids, they served as tombs. There are more than 100 in Egypt, and nearly all of them are found on the west side of the Nile River. The sun set in the west, so that was the place where your body would set, where you would be buried. And they even had an expression, how we talk about how someone passes away. They would say, he went west. And so they're all on the west bank of the Nile River. want to talk a bit about the Egyptian calendar. And what you see here is just a short piece. I took this photograph from a much bigger wall painting that had these symbols. My guide told me, because I can't read them, my guide told me, if he knew what he was talking about, that this was a Egyptian calendar that was being, on the walls of, I think, if I remember correctly, one of the temples. I want to say Karnak, but I'm not sure if that was it. I have to go back and look at my notes. The Egyptian calendar had 12 months with 30 days each. And so they had the idea, that there ought to be like 360 days, and then they would add 5 days. So 360 plus 5 is 365 days, and that's right, except for, remember, we have a leap year. Because a year is actually just like a quarter day longer than that, and they knew that, but they didn't have the leap year, and so no leap year, and that means that their calendar would be off one day every 4 years, and it would take 1,460 years for the calendar to make a full cycle where it would be back on track again. Because that, what you do is you add 4 days every 365 days to make that 460 years, and they would celebrate that. They knew when that would take place, and they would celebrate that, and this was called the apotekastasis, the reestablishment. The time when the calendar would finally be back on track, and of course that's only going to last for 4 years, and then after 4 years it's going to be off by 1 day, and they're going to start the cycle again. But that's going to help us calculate the Egyptian calendar, and it's also going to help us calculate the dates and the reigns of when these things take place. So our Egyptian chronology is really pretty good. Now it's not exact. In fact, there's a low chronology and a high chronology, and the difference is about 22 years, and it depends where you're taking your astronomical observations. Are you taking them in the south from Thebes, or are you taking them in the north from places like Alexandria or Memphis, around Lower Egypt? Something else that we see in the Old Kingdom is known as the Niles Headdress. Now, sometimes you'll see in a movie where there's a slave or a taskmaster, and he's got this headdress on that he's wearing. That's just not the case. This was a sign of the pharaoh's authority. It wasn't a crown, but it was like the crown. The crown could get a little bit heavy and cumbersome. So this is something else that he could wear. But this wasn't worn by all. This was just worn by one in that kind of authority by the pharaoh. At the end of the Old Kingdom, we have what's called the First Intermediate Period, where everything just seems to fall apart. In the much later writings of Manetho describing this period, he says there were 70 kings in 70 days. And Egyptians, that we said last time, really loved stability. They wanted everything to be the same all the time, the same kind of art, and the same kind of king, and the same kind of structure, and the same kind of building. And now there was change. And that wasn't a good thing. And Egypt fell apart. Egypt ceased to be a single nation, and the nation itself crumbled. Part of this was caused by the entrance of Bedouins, people from the outside, and the Egyptians weren't too fond of outsiders, but some came in during this period. And this is also the advent of pessimistic literature, where just like in Mesopotamia, there seems to be a regular attitude of sort of a pessimistic attitude. Now that's captures a voice in Egypt as well, where things aren't quite as good as they used to be, and people are longing for the good old days.